transition housing, and homes for those with special needs and disabilities. However, this discussion to our panel tonight is focused on affordable housing, sometimes referred to as workforce housing. So let's get started. And I'm starting with, at least from my perspective, seems like a standard definition of affordable. And we'll see whether or not the panelists agree, which is 30% of an individual's or family's gross income on housing, and that includes utilities. I did a rough calculation at $15 an hour, which is a pretty healthy wage here for the average wage earner. That would be about $780 a month. I don't know if that's considered affordable for housing and rental space here in the Flathead, but I'd like to ask each panelist to start with their own definition of affordable and how that's applied within the programs that you operate. And then also talk a little bit more about your programs and how you provide affordable housing through those programs that you manage. And Kim, since you're looking right at me, I'm going to start with you.
Hello, there we go. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this, hot topic for the community. And thank you for organizing it. And thank you to all of you for spending the evening here with us. I think it's going to be a great conversation. So I'm with Northwest Montana Community Land Trust, and it is the largest and I think the oldest land trust in Montana. A community land trust is an organization that holds the land underneath homes in trust for the community. And in our case, in Kalispell, within the city limits, we own 52 properties, and the homes on top of the properties are sold to homeowners. But the value of the property is subtracted from the cost of the home. And these homes were purchased right after the last recession, excuse me. And so they were bought at a fairly reasonable price, rehabbed, and sold. And then the homeowners that own those homes lease the land underneath them for $25 a month from the land trust. And they sign a lease when they purchase the home, and they agree that when they want to sell the house at any time, they would sell the home back to the land trust or to another eligible home buyer for 100% of what they paid for it when they purchased the house, plus 25% of whatever the increase in appraised value is since they purchased the house. So I've sold 4 houses in the last year, and those houses that were purchased back in 2011 are now being revolved back into the community for somewhere between $110,000 and $180,000. So I mentioned eligible home buyers. For us, an eligible home buyer in the Flathead Valley is 120% of area median income or less. And 25% of our homes need to be owned by somebody who's at 50% area median income or less. And just to give you a couple of ideas, this year, a one-person family household at 50% area median income would make $24,850. A 4-person family at 100% area median income would have a household income of $71,000. And if you wanted to go up to 120% area median income, you're talking about a household of 4 that makes up to $85,000 per year. So that's kind of our range. We like to have our homes spread out to people who are from 30, 40, 50% for 25% of the homes, and then from 50 up to 120 spread out equally. So
there must be quite a bit of competition for those houses. Is that true? Do you have a waiting list?
We have 25 people on our waiting list right now, and I haven't really been advertising at all.
Where did the seed money come from to originally purchase these homes?
So after the last recession, when there were so many homes in the foreclosure market, the federal government was providing cities opportunities to have grant money, neighborhood stabilization program funds, and to get those homes out of bank ownership, off the foreclosure market, rehabbed, and back into people's hands. That was the whole purpose. So Catherine King at the City of Kalispell partnered up with Community Action Partnership and Marnie McClary and Doug Rothy and a whole great group of forward-thinking people, and they were able to secure 2 sets of grants that totaled $3 million, and they just kept buying houses and rehabbing them, selling them, revolving the money, buying more houses. So that's where the funds came from, the first round. Sorry,
And
that's
is
a
there
lot
room-
of information.
No, that is a lot of information, and I guess I'm also curious, is there room for more of that kind of home acquisition within your organization or others
So
like yours?
that federal program was just a temporary thing. It was all about the housing crash that we had. The state of Montana does have funds, various kinds of funds for housing. There are also private foundations and private donors that our organization can tap into. So right now, we are looking at how we can add more inventory, whether that's in Kalispell or Whitefish or Columbia Falls or maybe even Polson. We're looking at all those opportunities.
Well, I think I'll continue to be deferential to our out-of-town guests and ask you, Ryan, kind of starting back at that initial question, how do you view affordability, and how do you respond either as a private citizen or through your role in the city council to making sure more affordable housing is available?
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to thank the sponsors for hosting this event and inviting me to participate. I think it's great to have this conversation, and the more we can talk about affordable housing, the better for our community, I think. And also, I want to, just before I get started here, say that I am on the Kalispell City Council, but I don't represent the views of the City of Kalispell or the City Council generally. Just offering my personal opinions on it through my lens on the City Council. But I would agree with you on the definition of affordable housing, that 30% of income is kind of the technical definition that's used by our service providers and the federal government. So that's definitely the hard and fast rule for affordable housing. But I'd also say in my efforts that I've been working towards on the City Council, that not only for that, looking at that hard and fast rule, but also anything that's pushing the price point down in the market is going to be a good thing, right? We want to try to do things that increases supply relative to demand, so that we can push that price point down and make things more affordable, even if they don't necessarily meet that affordable definition. So, so there's different approaches in trying to do that. Some of the things that I've focused on the City Council, affordable housing has been my number one priority on the City Council. It's something that I campaigned on when I was elected, and I talk about it a lot on the City Council, somewhat to maybe a little bit annoyance to some of my fellow city councilors. But one of the things I did when I came on City Council is I asked for a new ordinance on accessory dwelling units. Kalispell was the only local municipal government without an ADU ordinance. And we did just earlier this year pass that ordinance and have the backyard cottages, garage apartments allowed in certain zones in Kalispell now, like our other local municipal governments. But the city, one of the things that I think needs to be acknowledged and I think is really great about Kalispell City Council is that we've been very open to a lot of housing, a lot of multifamily rental housing. So in the past 2 years that I've been on City Council, we have approved 2,000 multifamily units in Kalispell just in 2 years. We've also approved 800 single-family units in the last 2 years. And so if you look at the data about housing in the Flathead Valley, Kalispell provides by far and away the most housing. We are pulling the weight in the valley for providing housing. And I'm very proud of that with my fellow council members in approving those units. One of the things we've also looked at doing, obviously costs is a factor in the affordability. We did eliminate payment in lieu of taxes for nonprofits providing housing. So if you're a nonprofit housing provider, you don't have to now do a payment in lieu of taxes, something we did. Something that was also done on the city council, I actually voted against it, but lowering impact fees for developers, water and sewer impact fees, making that a little more affordable. The reason I opposed it was because those costs went on water and sewer rates, and so I'm all for lowering those costs, but it depends on who then picks up the costs, and I was not comfortable with putting them on water and sewer rates because obviously lower income folks are also going to be paying those as well. But one of the things I tried to do also on affordable housing last year was to have a needs assessment to assess what the conditions are in Kalispell for affordable housing, what we need, and then also develop a plan to address that need. City of Whitefish has something like that that they adopted a number of years ago, and I wanted to see Kalispell do something similar. Unfortunately, I was not able to convince enough of my fellow city council members to do that, so that's on hold for the moment. One of the things I'm looking towards in the future is how can we leverage city-owned land for affordable housing. Again, that's something that City of Whitefish is doing with the snow lot and developing affordable housing on there. The city of Kalispell, a lot of people may not realize, owns a number of parking lots in the downtown area. And right now we have a proposal to develop a hotel there, which will be beneficial to downtown, but I'd like to see leverage not only that project, but some of our other city-owned parking lots for affordable housing projects. And then finally, ideally, I would like to update our zoning to allow for what's called missing middle housing. And the idea of missing middle housing is you have, your single family housing, which dominates most development in most communities. And then you have your multifamily housing, the larger projects that might be 40, 80 units or more. But what you find, particularly in zoning, is a lack of ability to build what they call the missing middle, which is the duplexes, the triplexes, the fourplexes. And I even have in my single-family neighborhood in Kalispell across the street an 8plex, which is a 2-story building. And I know there's a lot of fear around multifamily housing in single-family neighborhoods, but I have an 8plex across the street. I have a 4plex right next door to me, and it's great. I don't have any problem living next to those, and I think they just make for a better neighborhood. So I'd like to see more of that.
Thank you. That's very comprehensive about what you do, and I think I'd like to kind of continue that frame of mind so the audience can get a better, or frame of questioning so the audience can get a better understanding about all the various programs and how they operate in the region of affordable housing. So I guess that goes to you next, Ben, as a member of the Whitefish Housing Authority. Housing authorities are specifically created for this purpose, if I understand correctly, and just kind of like Ryan, you both speak on behalf of the Housing Authority, but also as a private citizen. We can talk about that in a minute as well. But yeah, please talk a little bit about the Housing Authority and what you do for affordability.
Yeah, absolutely. So the mission of the Housing Authority is to offer safe, decent, and affordable housing to the the community of Whitefish, which is a pretty broad mission. And our programs kind of cover a broad range of that. The Whitefish Housing Authority, one of the initial projects was the Mountain View Manor, which is a 50-unit independent living facility that we operate. And so in addition to operating that independent living facility, the Housing Authority manages deed restrictions associated with the Legacy Homes program, and more recently has become its own developer with the snow lot that Ryan mentioned, as well as a recent partnership with another developer to build a low-income housing tax credit project with Homeward out of Missoula, which was recently completed. And so the Housing Authority moving forward is working to develop more properties into workforce housing, houses that come with a deed restriction, meaning that the occupant has to qualify based on their income and residency. And the benchmark for affordability, as we've mentioned, particularly with a lot of these government sponsored programs, is that 30% affordability. But I think my own definition of affordability gets a little broader, and is, if someone can live somewhere but still have an opportunity to save money and give back to their community, whether that's through some level of public service or financially. That's my kind of personal metric of affordability.
Maybe just keeping you on the spot for a minute, Ben, because Ryan raised the matter of the assessment survey, and that was done here in Kalispell, as Ryan mentioned, a few years ago. But it's kind of, where is that now? And what's the status of that, which found, if I recall, a 2,000 unit deficit of affordable housing?
980 unit
980,
deficit?
Okay, about 1,000.
About 1,000, yeah.
Maybe it's 2,000 today, who knows?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. So this is the 2015 housing needs assessment, and it estimated that Whitefish would need to have about 1,000 units, with about 60% of those below what the market provides by 2020 to be able to kind of provide for the workforce. And some of that was based on the vacancies in jobs. Some of that was based on the preference of the workforce that lives outside of Whitefish, who wishes to live closer to their job. At that time in 2016, I think about 50% of Whitefish workers lived outside of Whitefish. And it's hard to, we haven't made 605 units below market rate. And of those 980 units, it was estimated that about 400 would have to be ownership units and 500 would be rental units. But since that housing needs assessment, and before I mention that, the next housing needs assessment will be commencing very, very shortly, based on the availability of city level census data, which is not available quite yet, but in 2022 that housing needs assessment will be re-evaluated. But since then, since 2015, Whitefish's population has grown from 6,700 people to close to 9,000 people today, estimated at about 8,900 recently. The median home price in 2015 was $315,000, depending on if you were looking in the zip code or in the city proper. Median sale price recently, we're up up above $615,000. 619 was the latest number that I was able to pull. Similarly, in that time, 2015 to 2021 here, and again, I don't have the most recent year or two of data, but the median family income in this zip code has remained in the high 40s and low 50s. It's fluctuated from about 49,000 to 52,000, and it's on a slow upward trajectory, but obviously not quite at the rate of the cost of living. As for the number of units available that were below, that had some sort of subsidy attached to them, there were roughly 275 units in 2016, and I think we're up to about 350 right now, both rental and homeownership units, and so that's 50 to 75 units that have been constructed since 2016, and we're including. I'm including in my math like the 3 units that Jerry's expecting to move people in on at the by the end of the year here, and things like that. So things that are very, very recent. The 36 units at the Alpenglow apartments that moved in just a few months ago as well.
So some room for improvement there, and I guess that's a good segue, Jerry. I think a couple of things came up in Ben's comments. One is how to solve the problem, that there has to be almost some level of altruism to this, if that's the right word. But you are in the middle of a project that is building affordable housing using the concept of deed restriction. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the Trailview project and how that is moving forward.
Yeah, I think we've heard there's lots of different definitions of affordability and workforce housing, and I kind of like to use attainable housing because there's a lot of different levels. Like we need the $700 rents, but we need houses for under $400,000 too. And our project is kind of on the higher end of that. We're in the 120 to 150% AMI range, but we're trying to keep houses below market. And we're right now, based on Ben's numbers, we're half of market median price, and we're selling for about 60% of appraised value. And it's just another sector that's needed. There's lots of different things that are needed. This 600 homes that we're supposed to get in the last 5 years just haven't happened. And we're going to do 58, but that's just a drop.
How far along are you now?
We have 18 homeowners that are moved in, hopefully 3 more by the end of this year, and we hope to have about halfway through by June.
Now, in the middle of what's happening right now in this economy, you started before we saw the rise in material prices, labor. How has that skewed your projections for continuing to build out the rest of these homes?
Well, we didn't, when we were doing a prospectus on this in 2017, we didn't pencil in pandemic. So it's really, it's a challenge, but everyone up here is under the same challenge. I think it's something we'll probably get into a little bit later, but it's definitely been, I think that's why we're all here today, is it's just really spiked.
And the key, we've heard about deed restriction in a couple other contexts. That's how, through your project, you keep these houses affordable in perpetuity?
Yeah, that's the key when you hear people saying they're going to sell houses, affordable houses. If there's no deed restriction attached to it, it's only affordable for the first person. And it's kind of confusing too, is there's qualifications for our homes, which have income limits. You have to be a full-time resident, no rental. So those are more qualifications. The deed restriction is basically the home can only appraise for 3% a year, higher than what you paid for. So if you go to sell in 4 years, you can get 3% appraised, appreciation, not appraised, appreciation a year. And So the goal there is if you live somewhere for 3 or 4 years, you're gonna make a little bit of money. It's still gonna be affordable for the next person, and the biggest thing is you weren't losing rent for 4 years.
Ed, that brings us to you and another perspective on how to solve this crisis. Well, first of all, that's a question I have. Do you consider this workforce housing, affordable housing situation a crisis? We have lots of crises, climate, pandemic right now.
I think if you, you've been around the valley for the summer, you've tried to go to eat, you've tried to buy bread, you try to drive, it's a crisis, yes. I mean, by my figures and talking to businesses in town, just in Whitefish, we've lost at least 500 employees over the last year. And they're not coming back, they've left.
And you are a small business owner, so
Yes.
you're talking about your employees.
I have 2 businesses, and I have about 30 some employees in the winter, and right now I'm lucky. I have staff. I saw the writing on the wall. I rented 3 houses out in August. We had to stop doing lunches in August, like everybody else. I didn't think it was going to happen to me. It's a desirable place to work. But when I got involved with this, I started looking at Craigslist every day, and I still look every day. And it's amazing that there isn't more than 10 rental units available in this entire valley at any given day. Of a valley of over 100,000 people, there's no more than 10 rentals. It's amazing. So I started digging into it, and it made me, I definitely believe it's a crisis when I've talked to realtors and property agency management companies, and I asked them a real straightforward question. Will a local ever be able to afford to rent or buy a home here again? The answer is no. There's no way. There's not many apartments going up. It's mostly single-family homes, and it's a very desirable place to live. I don't blame people for wanting to be here. And a lot of these people, more often than not, they're fairly well off. They work out of their home. That's a big deal. That's not going to go away. There are large companies that are now saying that they are getting rid of their offices and their employees will work remote. We're looking at, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that will be moving to towns like this, and Whitefish is incredibly desirable. We've seen these costs go up and everything, and so what we started doing is looking for land, figuring out how we can be a part of this, solution. And we've got a lot of people working on different things, and if everything that we all have going on right now, we could come up with maybe 600 or 700 beds in the next couple of years. It's still not enough. We know that, but it's something we have to do. So my employees, a good example is like our workforce housing project. We're not affordable housing. That wouldn't be the term we would use because we are workforce housing. We need to house employees. We believe in affordable housing without a doubt, and we would love for our tenants to be able to move into affordable, housing and be able to buy their own house. Because I start to think about it, like how can anybody here, if nobody can rent or buy a house, what are we going to do? So if we can build housing, get the business community together, and somehow figure out a way to subsidize the rent on the cost of these buildings, where our employees are paying, $600-700 a month instead of 12 or 15, they can actually save money over the course of 3 or 4 years and be a part of this community forever. And it's important to do that, in my belief. So when I say workforce housing, that's what it is. It's something that's for the employers. We want to help out the employees because, again, I don't think it's going to get any better. I tell a lot of people, there's only about 7 or 8 towns like this in the whole country. And unfortunately, we're the only one with a lake. And it's desirable. And we didn't even have a boat show this spring because the boats were sold out. That's really crazy. And I don't know if I touched on it, but so my employees, every employee I have, pretty much, they can't qualify for affordable housing. They make too much money. And you're seeing wages go up here. Great. And it's great. My payroll's it's high. But it's great. We're busy. But they don't fall in the category for affordable housing, and they don't make anywhere near enough to go buy an $800,000, $900,000 home. I looked at RE/MAX this morning. There's a house for $549,000, and the next one's $799,000, and the next one's $1.2 million. That is that's, if you go from lowest to highest on the RE/MAX website, and I go to, all these realtor websites, and I kind of get this information. And, so for us, it's we have to do this, and we have to keep going, there should be really no end in sight. If you just say, we have about 9,000 people living here, Ben, is that right? Holy smokes. I mean, and how many of those are in the workforce? We don't know. So when I started surveying business, I went to Safeway. They need a minimum of 50 employees. They've needed that for over a year. Super One, 50 employees. I mean, it's amazing. The Ski Hill, Glacier Restaurant Group, these are very large corporations that are struggling, because because there's no housing. And when we lose these people, how do we get them back?
Are you working with some of these other employers to figure out
Yeah,
how
oh yeah,
to provide workforce housing?
Yeah, we probably have a minimum of 20, well, probably 40 to 50 businesses are showing interest. That's how we're going to raise our money. We're basically coming up with a formula of what it would cost each person. Right now, we have 25 studios that we can rent out starting in December for our members, which is great. We have a campaign to ask property rental agency companies. We have a letter that we're going to have them send to their clients, and just basically begging them to rent their vacation homes or their second homes to us, to local employers. Now, Winter Park, Colorado put a fund together, $320,000, I believe. The city did it, and they are renting these houses for their employees. And so that's where we want to start, because it's going to take us a couple of years to develop land. But in the meantime, if we can get these houses, and that's where none of these houses are cheap. That's where we've got to devise a way to subsidize, the rent for these people somehow, where you can apply through a nonprofit that can subsidize your housing again. So that our employers are not paying. You don't want to be paying 60% of your income to live, and that is what's happening.
Where does this program go that you're working on with this coalition of employers? What are the next steps?
Well, we have land under contract. We're working with developers. But the next step is getting houses. Like I said, I rented 3 houses, in August, knowing that, I look at Craigslist every day. It doesn't even matter what they cost. I subsidize the rent for my employees right now. None of my employees pay more than $700, even though some of the beds are $900 or $1,100. I'm subsidizing that myself right now, and I think it's because I have to, and I'm open, and I have a full staff. But that's not everybody has the time, I think, or the foresight to do this. So we're trying to get together and help everybody out and get as many units as we can. Like I said, we just got 25 units in town here that we can start renting out in a week or so. And we're just going to keep going from there, get as many houses as we can. And hopefully, I think it was 1,200 rental homes. Is that right, Ben? Do you know, in Whitefish, was that the number?
I'm not sure.
It's somewhere around 12 or 1,500 dwellings, that are rental. If we get 200 of them, it's going to help. But think about what's going to happen next summer. They're tripling the size of our airport. It's only getting worse, and property values are only going to go up. So, yeah, we're going to do what we can and keep getting as many houses, and maybe we'll try to buy an old motel. Who knows? We're going to do what we can, because we want to keep these businesses going, and we want to keep the character of this town. That's pretty much what got me started. A really good friend of mine had to move back to Minnesota, and I was like, dang. And then it kept happening. And at one meeting I said, I'm going to tell you guys something that's really sad. Every one of us now knows somebody that had to leave Whitefish. They had to leave Montana. Every one of us. Wow. None of us thought it would happen.
If anybody in the audience we are, by the way, I didn't know if I mentioned that we are taping this, and we'll try to get it out on, I believe, YouTube or one of the channels. So if anybody's seeing this or in the audience, they should contact you, send you an email if they have a house.
Workforce Housing Project at Gmail. And then we have a Facebook page as well, and we haven't gotten a website yet. And again, we meet a minimum of once a week, and it's not easy getting all these people together and getting everybody to agree on what to do, but we're getting there.
Ben, I'm a little uncomfortable bringing up the elephant in the room, and tomorrow we're having a follow-up hearing on the Mountain Gateway project. But you, as a private citizen, I should preface, right, not as a member of the planning board, made an interesting comment at the public hearing in support of that development, that if it doesn't get approved the way it's at least roughly configured now with 32 affordable units, it will be developed unaffordably. What did you mean by that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'm someone who holds an unpopular opinion about the Mountain Gateway development. I see several people in this room, and maybe some on this table are with me. But you know, for me, and this is me speaking as a private citizen, not on behalf of the Whitefish Housing Authority. The 32 deed restricted units in that development proposal are great. That's 32 units dedicated to people making between 60 and 80% of the area median income. But I think what is more important about the development is, along with those 32 units, the other 238 units are long-term rentals at the market rate. And so what that means, those are 238 rental units that, at least as it's proposed, can't be bought, sold, rented via Airbnb or short term, are not second homes, are not vacation. Those are 238 rental units that, by the nature of them, they might not be, meet our like 30% affordable quota, but it is an aspect and a type of housing that is lacking in this community, the rental units. And I think a big thing about that is the security of those rental units. I think about my friend who flips pizzas at J Boys, who's had 2 houses sold out from under him this year, like as a renter. They're like, well, the house sold, and we couldn't afford the $600,000 to buy their 1-bedroom, 800 square foot house, so they had to move somewhere else. And so I see these as safe and to a degree affordable, and it's also by adding that type of housing to the market, it will slow down the inevitable creep of affordability. And that's why well, that's the nature of the project. But if the project doesn't go through in how it does, or in how it's proposed, the developer, who I believe deeply cares about providing a need for this community, he could just as easily slap whatever number of houses on there, whatever number of $1.5 million houses. And I aspire to have a $1 million house someday, maybe, but that's not a house that fits the needs of the community that we're talking about here tonight.
And I think that proposal also includes not just those apartment buildings, but also townhouses which people can buy, and it's a mix of a community, just like a mix of what Whitefish or Kalispell or Columbia Falls looks like now. It's not a bunch of multi-million-dollar 10,000 square foot homes. It's a community mixture, and so that those deed restrictions and those opportunities to own homes, townhomes, I really think that the solution to this problem that we probably all agree to some level or another is a crisis. The solution to not having your friends who've lived in a rental home for 7 years have it sold out from underneath them, and suddenly they're living in their church basement with their family because there is simply nothing else to be bought or rented for either a reasonable or unreasonable price. The solution is to build more homes. The solution is to be more efficient and effective, taking advantage of the infrastructure that the cities have already. And that means maybe a little more high density than some people really think Montana should be. But what's the alternative? And the other thing that we really need to think about is public-private partnerships. And in those partnerships, everybody has to win. You can't ask the private organizations that are their sole purpose for existence is to be profitable. That's what businesses are in the business of doing, is making a profit. You cannot ask them to give and give and give if the community also is not willing to work together. But luckily, a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking, sometimes you can make a one-time investment into something and have affordability in perpetuity. But it isn't maybe the way we've always done it. So when I look at that Whitefish project, I think it looks like it ticks a lot of boxes. And be careful what you wish for, because you might get something so much less desirable.
In fairness to the other side, I used to be a journalist and reporter, so there are always two sides. And I'm going to put you on the spot, Ryan, because a number of the concerns that came up, and I really don't want to focus on this. I promise we'll end the discussion on the Mountain Gateway project with this question, and then pretty soon we'll get on to your questions. But the concern has to do with traffic, infrastructure impacts, water, sewer, a perception of, spoiling that open area. How do you, as a decision maker, that ultimately will say yay or nay to a project, not this one, obviously. Fortunately, it's not in your jurisdictional territory, but how do you weigh that? How do you weigh the public opposition and the impact upon infrastructure with, what Kim is saying, what Ben is saying?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I definitely will not be weighing in on that project. I fortunately, not being in Whitefish city government, I don't have to take a position on that issue. But, and just a little background, my day job is with the Flathead Land Trust, doing private land conservation. So I'm very much also focused on conservation of our open spaces. And so that makes an interesting process in my mind, thinking about the need for housing and approving more housing and making sure we have that housing supply so that we have affordable housing, or housing the people who live here, but also try and conserve our open spaces. And my solution to that is density and infill, and getting as efficient use out of the land as we can. So I definitely lean towards, when looking at projects, if it's going to be developed, I want to see it developed as about as high density as you can really get out of the land. But there's definitely projects that are not appropriate as well, either for their environmental impact or the impact on infrastructure. Looking at Kalispell and the decisions we make, and I think cities generally, we have long-range plans, right? We have a growth policy that accounts for transportation impacts, water, sewer impacts, and so forth. And with Kalispell's example, we just put in the West Side Interceptor, which upgraded the sewer system on the west side of town, that allows for significant more development on the west side of Kalispell. And that was planning out for the future, knowing we're growing a community, and making sure that infrastructure was in place in advance for that growth. Hopefully you're doing good long-range planning and anticipating that growth and making sure that infrastructure is in place. So, again, not commenting on this project at all, but I will say that having read a lot about affordable housing literature nationwide, one of the things that is probably the biggest barrier to affordable housing is the not in my backyard reaction to it. Everybody is for affordable housing, just not in this location, right? Because that's where they live or whatever. And I will say that, traffic is often the issue that people focus in on to say it's not appropriate here. And the problem is we can't continually give in to that, because then we're in the situation we're in, which is no affordable housing. And you look at the numbers, and we have from the Whitefish needs assessment the amount of housing units that are missing, right? And that's an issue in communities that are struggling with affordable housing nationwide, is that there's a certain need for a number of houses, and we are not meeting it. And nationwide, it's millions. We are millions of homes in the hole. They do not exist. And so we need to find a way to build that housing. And it is a market issue. It's a supply and demand issue. If you don't have the supply to meet the demand, you're going to have an affordability issue. So we have to build it, and I think the best approach is for that higher density, that infill development, and so that's certainly what I push for on the city council. And but people have to recognize to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And again, that's not talking about any individual project, but just know that NIMBYism is one of the biggest barriers to affordable housing.
Because it's a big barrier to all kinds of housing, not just.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that we tap into that discussion, particularly with you, Ed, and Ben, who have lived in other communities and seen some other solutions. But before we go there, maybe we'll end on that question. But Jerry, you're the private developer sitting at the table here. And first of all, I guess thank you for what I perceive anyway as an altruistic effort that you and your partners are doing to build affordable housing. But I'm curious to hear what some of those obstacles, we talked a little bit about, costs of materials, labor costs and the like. We've also heard about city engagement and the rules and regulations. Is that also an impediment to getting projects done? And if it is, how do you navigate that? The rules, regulations, the costs, the permitting, et cetera.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue. This whole idea came to me from visiting other areas, and Ben and I talked about this, and one in particular was Telluride, who was having these meetings 30 years ago. And, I'm glad we're having them now, but there's other places we can learn from that have been doing this a long time. And when this needs assessment came out, it really made it clear what the need was here in Whitefish. And we started looking for land and found land that met all the criteria we needed. And I found a partner that was interested in doing this too. And it's a unique project in that I work at the hospital in Kalispell. My partner, Dave Brandt, is a local contractor, owns businesses here, and we're not relying on this development for income. So we don't have investors that are looking for returns. Our return on this is providing something to the community, and the real thanks thank you for, I appreciate your thanks, but it's really from the homeowners that move in. And I don't really want to get back on this other project that, is the elephant here, but I just caution with that, knowing what we're going through right now and not having investors that want returns, that I think they have great intentions, but no one knows what those units are really going to cost and how affordable they are going to be. And maybe they will be, maybe they won't, but that's just something you really have to look at. Maybe they'll be $1 million homes, but they also might be $4,000 a month apartments. They have to pay their costs. And you can't even get a quote on a piece of lumber, 4 days out now. It used to be 90 days, you could lock it in, now they won't even do that. What's your question? Sorry.
Well, it actually, what you just said raises another, and again, I don't, if you're not comfortable answering this, I get it completely, because even though you're doing this not for profit, you're still building, and there's still, some proprietary information in that. How are you going to do this affordably without losing money while still making affordable housing available under this deed restriction and with the, like I say, the cost of materials, everything going up, 4-day response time on the cost of lumber?
Yeah, it's challenging, and everyone's going to go through that with the mountain. This new development, they're trying to do everything. We're actually just met last week and trying to come up with creative ways. The first half of the development's sold out. We're hoping to have that complete by May, but to move forward and keep the homes priced the way they are, we're going to have to get really creative, and we're working on that. I think it's doable. But one of the things, and I remember your question now, working with the city and working with local government, this was a new project for the area. Not only was it all deed restricted, but it's really the first development in Whitefish that's ever been done from ground to building. Every other single-family development has been someone develops the land, sells the lots, and contractor A through Z comes in and builds the homes, which is a very normal way to do it, but very inefficient, and definitely will not work for affordable housing. So there's challenges with the city, and having never dealt with this before, I can give you an example. Their subdivision regulations require that every piece of infrastructure is done before you can get one single permit. So this is a 4-year project. We had to put every street light in, every sidewalk, every sign, everything, and now we're carrying those costs for 4 years. And this isn't a slap at the city. These are the regulations that are in place. And they've never done this before. But it's something that needs to be worked on. Those are big costs. And then we've talked about impact fees. We have 10 to 12 homes being built at any time. We have to pay all the impact fees up front, even though there's not going to be an impact until a year from now. And each home is $12,000 roughly, so that's $120,000 of carrying costs. And this stuff all adds up. At the end of this project, we'll have paid over $1 million to city fees.
Oh my gosh.
And if you add in carrying costs to that, it's $24,000 a house. And when you're trying to keep homes below $400,000, that's a big number. And again, this isn't. The city's been great to work with, but these things need to be looked at. It's something that we've discovered, and I think the city's discovered from this project.
So we are at the 8 o'clock hour, and rather than focusing specifically on solutions from other communities, I'd like to ask each of you, starting with you, Ed, and maybe you can incorporate some of what you've observed elsewhere in other communities that you've skied in and visited and communicated with. What would you say are 2 of the top solutions that you would recommend or propose for addressing this problem?
Higher density zoning is absolutely necessary. And again, it's a big not in my backyard thing, and I think people are worried about their property values. You've got a healthy part of our community, have trophy homes, and in affordable housing, I think they worry that that's going to hurt their property value. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, 1 in 7 homes in America is now owned by a firm, by investment firms. 1 in 7 homes. This was in the New York Times somewhere time in July or so. You can Google it. I found it very interesting, and because real estate's a great investment, especially in places like this. And I don't know, that number could very well be higher here. So we need higher density. We have to work with the city. In their plan in 2016, they put out, they brought up workforce housing, brought up higher density zoning. We just haven't done it yet. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what's going on in town and what we are losing. One complex just, the lease with the government to make it affordable has gone away, and now the Colorado Village is going to go to market value soon, and that's on Wisconsin Avenue, and the Alpha building, apartments behind the VFW are getting torn down this spring. So we're losing about 200 more employees by May. So this density, mean, if you look at the zoning map in Whitefish, there really isn't much at all so I'd say, I think that's where it starts. It's gotta be put in the right place. We don't want everything everywhere, or in one spot, but what makes sense, where it makes sense is where it needs to be done, and we'll just, rely on our community leaders and the public to kind of support this idea of higher density. I mean, like I said, and I told you guys earlier, I'd love it to be 3,000 people in this town like it was when I moved here. But that's not feasible. It's beautiful here. People are gonna be here, and, if we're gonna, service the needs of these people, we need density, and we need apartments, and again, the elephant in the room, and I know people really get down on me for supporting the Gateway, but, man, it's 240 apartments. I mean, who else is doing that? Nobody. In fact, we're going away from that by losing the Alpha Apartments, by Colorado Village going to market value, and we're losing a lot of houses here, and they've got to be replaced somehow, or our businesses are going to be open very limited hours forever.
Thanks, Ed. That's very realistic and passionate answer. Before I move on down the panel, I do want to remind everybody that we're getting into the audience question opportunity. So if you have a card, make sure you raise it, and our runners will pick up your card, and we'll get those questions answered. So the same to you, Jerry. If you have a single or a couple of solutions that you think might help address this issue.
I think the project that Ed and Toby are working on with the business co-op is a great idea. Obviously, there's just not a lot of government funding available, and funding is what's needed. We've had, a program in place here in town, a voluntary program to provide housing, and gives you some development incentives, and it hasn't worked for a reason. And, funding is needed. Another interesting project that's happening in Bozeman that I've kind of been in contact with, it's very similar to ours. They're doing 62 homes on 8 acres. It's called Bridgerview, and it's a land trust also, I think is where the land came from, but they're gonna do 31 homes on below market value, deed restricted, and 31 homes at market value. And the market value homes will pay for the overage on the under market. And it's set up as a nonprofit again. You can't, if you're gonna trying to look for big returns as a developer and investments, it's just not there.
Kim?
Well, I thank you for doing this, because I've already learned a lot from my co-panelists and given me some things to think about. I think probably what we really need to take away from this is that you need all of the tools in the toolbox. Like, we need rentals, we need studio apartments, we need land trust homes where people can get in at a lower rate and build a little equity before they step up to the next level. We need altruistic business people, and we also need public-private partnerships with business people who understand the big picture. I was appalled by some of the conversations that were going on about who lives in rentals. I lived in a rental 4 years ago for 18 months while my husband and I were building our home. If you want young teachers, you want that new police officer to join the force, if you want somebody to come and work in your local mechanic shop or do an apprenticeship with the local plumber, those people aren't going to be buying homes. They need apartments to start with. If you've got somebody like me who's transitioning from one house to another, they need to be able to rent something for 12 months. And this whole attitude of renters are, something less desirable. If you want somebody to be working in your restaurants, in your local businesses, in your city office, getting the work done of this community, this is part of the mix. And so we need all those tools. I love the land trust model because it's a one-time investment that keeps homes affordable in perpetuity. I think that we need to probably be spending a little more time thinking about how we do more of that type of out-of-the-box thinking, and those would be my 2 solutions.
So I'm going to switch it up with you just a little, Ryan, as our one elected official on the panel. Are there discussions like this going on among the other, all the jurisdictions, Flathead County, Columbia Falls, Whitefish, and even the unincorporated areas that have community interests, Big Fork?
I can't speak to necessarily those communities. Obviously, we're in Whitefish, and Ben and Whitefish has a history here, and certainly on Kalispell City Council, we're talking a lot about affordable housing. I'm not as familiar with Big Fork, Columbia Falls. I would say with the county, one of the things that I just think is there's a certain sense, I think, at the county that the cities are the cities, and the county deals with everything outside the cities. And I would like our county to view the cities also as part of the county, and that they can also be part of the solution within the cities for addressing housing needs. That we can partner with the county within our cities to address affordable housing. So
I'll give you a chance at another solution, but that sounds like
yeah.
a solution, yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on, Ed talked about the density, and one of my solutions, I do have two, but one of the things I wanted to focus in on that I would like to see with the reform of zoning, and just back up a little bit and talk about kind of the situation and the history there, that 70 to 90% of the land base of communities in the United States is dedicated to single-family only zoning and neighborhoods, right? So 70, 90%. I mean, the bulk of our land in the United States that's developed, within our urban communities is for single-family only zoning. And the history of that is a little bit interesting too. People may not realize part of that history is in the early 1900s, communities wanted to exclude African Americans from neighborhoods, and they actually zoned for it. But the Supreme Court struck it down in, I believe, 1918. But that was just as zoning was starting to really take hold and become a kind of a common thing in our communities. And some of these communities that wanted to exclude certain people from their neighborhood latched onto that zoning issue and zoned for single family only, because it was a way to achieve that goal through economic means by segregating by class. And so that's part of the history we're dealing with, and how single family only zoning got established in this country. And people don't really remember that history. But it does come down to, folks are fearful about who might be their neighbors and what it might mean for their property values. And the research actually shows that multifamily housing, on average, does not bring down your property taxes. It can. I mean, certainly if it turns into, you have a drug house, whether that's a single family only home or a multifamily, that's going to have an impact. But on average, it does not. So I think people, check your biases and your concerns about that, and make sure it's rooted in knowledge and facts about it. The other thing you hear a lot about is, I bought into this neighborhood and it shouldn't change, right? I have a certain characteristic that I bought into, and it should not change. When you live in a community that's changing dramatically because of great growth, it is not fair to say that my neighborhood cannot change, okay? It's not fair. You're pushing that impact to the community everywhere else. So I get it. I get that concern, but you have to be part of the solution and say, okay, my neighborhood is going to have to change too, because we are just growing too much to be able to go forward without any impact on my own personal neighborhood. Traffic, again, another one of the big concerns. I don't want to see the increased traffic. Well, that increase in population, they're going to be driving. You're going to see that traffic. If you have the infill development, it means those cars are on the road for a less amount of time. So you still have the cars, but they're going to be having a shorter distance they need to get to, or they live close enough to your, commercial areas because of the infill development that they can walk, they can bike, and not use a car. So keep that in mind. I know there was a development to dive into whitefish issues, but by mold down. And one of the concerns was the impact on traffic to the school. Well, how many people who would have lived in that development had it gone through would have had kids that would have walked to mold down that are now having to drive because that development, that higher density development didn't happen, and now they live somewhere further away. So that's just on reforming zoning. The other idea is, there's a market rate, a market-based approach, increasing supply. But as we know, in healthcare, in childcare, in education, the market does not always serve the lower end of our income, distribution population. You have to have another component to a market approach, and so you have to have some subsidized, deed-restricted approach to address that very bottom end that's never going to be served by the market. And so that's where I think you can tap into city-owned land. You work with, government dollars, the federal tax credit. We have a project that just came before Kalispell City Council off of Meridian, a number of units that take advantage of tax credit. So you have to have both approaches. I've talked a lot, sorry.
No, those are a lot of good ideas. We've heard a lot. And Ben, I'll let you kind of close us out with your suggestions for solutions.
Solutions are the tough one. But I think a big one is to create reliable revenue streams to support housing, and some opportunities in the future here in Whitefish might be a reallocation of the tourist tax. We are also, like the city is working hard right now, on the voluntary assessment. That's one of the objectives of the 2017 strategic housing plan to be able to create a small revenue that can be devoted to affordable housing. But I think the big solutions, in addition to creating and enhancing revenue streams, are also these public-private partnerships. Right now, the Housing Authority is working with the Whitefish Community Foundation and the City of Whitefish to look at an opportunity to create deed-restricted apartment units on Monaghan Road sometime in the future, and the opportunity is for that revenue to be able to be collected by the Whitefish Housing Authority and reinvested into community housing here. I have a list of other ideas, some other things that other similar communities are doing. Vancouver taxes on homes that are empty more than half of the year. Carbondale, Colorado, eliminated a minimum house size recently. Avon, Colorado, just outside of Vail, they have additional fees on short-term rentals. Hawaii municipalities are exploring what would it look like to defund tourism marketing in their community. And Bozeman, in a similar boat to us, it hasn't been touched on this evening, but the tool of inclusionary zoning, which we lost in the last legislative session. Not that it was the perfect tool, but Bozeman, without that tool, they are currently looking at community housing levies and actually increasing taxes on homeowners to enable that. That was more than two. Lots of little things that we could do, and lots of things that other communities are doing.
It's going to take a lot, and so that's good information. I thank you all. We're going to jump into some questions from the audience. I've got I've got a couple, I want to look through these a little closer, but I did get one prior to the start of the discussion. I'm not sure who to address this hot potato to. Unless somebody wants to raise their hand, the question is, can affordable housing be provided in the Flathead without a significant transfer of wealth from rich to poor? And if nobody's jumping at that, that's okay, we'll move on. Jerry, you're a brave man.
I'm not sure I'm gonna directly answer this, but, Ben was talking about the, project that they're working with the Community Foundation. It's on Monaghan Road. It's been in the paper a little bit. And, the valley has grown, and I know none of us really want to see that, but there are new people that are coming here that see this problem, very new people that have the means to potentially help it and do want to help it. So it's not, the growth isn't always negative, and can it be done without it? I don't know, but there's people that want to help do exactly what you're talking about. So
Benefactors?
that was around the
Yeah.
question, but
Are those donations, benefactors, what, yeah.
yeah, I think there's some people showing a lot of interest to, through the Community Foundation, which is a great organization, as we all know, to make some of this stuff happen. And then Ben said, provide a future revenue stream to make even more stuff happen. Can it happen without that? Yes, I think it can, but it can definitely happen with it.
And probably faster, yeah. Ryan?
Well, I'll just say that I think wealth and inequality in this country is a major problem, and there's a lot of good discussion around that of how to address it. I think on this issue, though, affordable housing will actually create wealth, right? It's about providing employee housing and providing a customer base in our communities. It's about development of new housing. There's a lot of wealth creation in, I think, addressing the affordable housing issue. So I don't want to belittle that question because I think it's a very important topic and issue. But in this case, I think actually we would be creating a lot of wealth, not necessarily disrupting the existing wealth inequality that I think does need to be disrupted, but maybe not in this on this topic.
Building on that with what Ryan said, construction jobs pay exceedingly well in this. So building more homes is creating a lot more jobs for some well-paid middle income people, and if you're creating opportunities for home ownership for people who can get a mortgage, but just can't get a big enough mortgage to buy a house in the Flathead Valley right now. If you're creating opportunities for those people to still be able to get a mortgage, own that home for 10 years, rather than throwing their rent away, they are building equity, they're building wealth, and they will take that wealth and they will do something more with it, moving out of a home that is, if it's deed restricted and remains affordable, then the next family will come in and they will build wealth as well. So I also don't want to belittle the question, but I think it overlooks the other side of the wealth building.
Okay, well,
If I could just add to add on to that, I mean, our project is a small project compared to a lot of these you're talking about, but it's a $24 million economic impact to the community. And it adds $150,000 of new tax revenue annually. And these are all full-time residents that live and work here and are contributing to the local economy all year long, not just in the spring or not just in the summer and the winter. So these, it's another way to look at some of these new projects that maybe you don't want, but there's a lot more to it than just providing housing.
good perspective. Thanks for willingness to jump in on that. And let's move on to some of the audience questions. One here is a good question, and I can probably answer this one, is why isn't there anyone on the panel representing rental agencies or Montana landlords? And I think that as we were putting this panel together, yes, that could have been a consideration for an addition to this panel. And that's, that's on us for who we chose and who was available and willing to sit down tonight. I'm not sure, one more body on this panel, we had a lot of questions to get through as it was, but, we may do this again, maybe in a different community. We'll see, but we'll keep that in mind. And then there's what city ordinances or restrictions could be implemented to limit the number of Airbnb vacation rentals in order to prioritize long-term housing for permanent community members and not tourists. Anybody want to tackle that? Ed, your eyes are, no, you're shaking no.
Well, it's about impossible to enforce. I mean, it's amazing how many people, there's certain zones that allow it, Airbnb. Unfortunately, we don't have, in Whitefish, you don't have anybody to enforce this. It's basically you have to create another position in enforcement and making sure. I mean, I suggested that, if you go to the property map for the county, for the city, and if the listed owner on that property has an LLC behind their name, maybe that's a way to start, because you're finding a lot of people are just buying homes, groups of people, families, they're just buying homes for their own timeshares, and it's very popular. So yeah, it's hard to police, and that's what we've been finding for sure.
Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, just, when Kalispell adopted its accessory dwelling units ordinance, we did put a restriction, no short-term rental on it. We had a number of limitations on the ordinance that I wish we hadn't, but one of the ones I did support was that limitation on short-term rentals. Now, there is an issue of enforcement. We'll see how that goes. They do apparently have, and I believe Whitefish has this as well, software where you can scan the listings and see if it matches addresses with your permitted accessory dwelling units. So, you do need a staff person who's, on top of that and a process to deal with it. But, so we'll see how the enforcement goes, but I was encouraged that we did limit that as part of our approval.
We kind of touched on this one a little bit regarding infrastructure, but let me just read the question. That is, different or upgraded infrastructure needed for higher density zoning? And what does that look like? And how long will it take to put in place in Whitefish? I mean, if the infrastructure is there for infill, I think that's what we discussed here on the panel, the impact is not as great as it is putting new development further away from town. Is that a fair answer?
That's a tough question. Kind of like what I think about that question. Looking back at the last housing needs assessment, that half of the Whitefish workforce commutes into Whitefish to work. With infill, we are reducing vehicle traffic. Potentially reducing vehicle traffic by having better access to walking, biking, public transportation to work. But at the same time, that is, more parking spots for cars that are needed, and a bigger stress on other city amenities that I don't feel like I'm qualified to speak to a higher degree.
I'll touch on that, and there's just I think there's a little bit of wiggle room, when it comes to water, sewer, some of these infrastructure that, you build in a little bit of wiggle room when you plan, right? And that's, you have your long range plans. But anytime a development comes through the city, I know at least with the city of Kalispell, that's part of the assessment that the city staff looks at. And so when they come to city council with approval requests for new development, it's going to have an assessment of the impact on water, sewer, everything else. And so, with the new development, planned unit developments and whatnot, the developer is putting in that infrastructure, right? They're the ones responsible for it. So with infill, I imagine if you need a bigger pipe, you say, yeah, we can say yes, but you got to pay for the bigger pipe, right, and installation. So, it's definitely looked at as part of the approval process.
Yeah, I can tell you when we did our project out of Monaghan, we had to bring in all the water and sewer, and we worked with the city to upsize everything, and the city paid for the upsized portion so that any future development out there is ready to go. So is it ready for, high density? I think they do plan for that.
One of the things I'll add that, a lot of people look at with new development on greenfield land, they say, well, the developer's paying for it, putting in all the pipes, all the roads, everything else, so, it's not a cost to the city. One of the things that's often forgotten, though, is that, yes, but then the city is responsible for the maintenance. So 20 years later, when a pipe fails or the road needs repaving, that's the city cost. And so that's where you get in the discussion of it's better to have the infill development and try to keep efficient use of your land so that when you come to the maintenance costs 20 plus years down the road, you don't have miles of pipe and street that you could avoid by having denser, more compact development.
The other thing that people often don't think about is that part of that infrastructure is police and fire departments and city services, and having your community in a situation where the fire department can get there quickly because you're not spread out all over the entire Flathead Valley is actually more efficient and effective than having a lot of houses spread out over the entire valley that are dependent on the Creston Volunteer Fire Department.
So kind of along the lines of infill, maybe this is to you, Ben, unless anybody else knows, what is Whitefish's current stance on ADUs?
I'd throw that one to Nathan in the front.
Oh,
in the
okay.
front row.
We've got an expert in the audience. Okay. Do we know? Do we have an answer? Do you want it?
That's what they're doing right now, so, it's probably one of the better codes in the Flathead Valley for ADUs. But it is still a process, and it's a risk, and I think that prevents people from building them.
Thank you, Nathan. Nathan, everybody. Did you hear it? Did you get the answer? Okay. Well, it's the best code, the ADU code in the valley that's being worked on here in Whitefish. Is it in place now, or is it underway? Going to the planning board first?
Yeah.
Okay. So updates to the ADU regulations going to planning board, so pay attention to that. This question is something we didn't address at all. Are manufactured homes an option? And that kind of gets into another program, Kim. I'm looking at you. Managed through NeighborWorks, the acquisition of trailer parks. I don't know if we want to dive into that here or not.
I didn't talk much. We have an umbrella organization which is called NeighborWorks Montana, and they're very focused on financing of housing and also education of home buyers. So they do a lot of pre-purchase and post-purchase first-time home buyers education. They also do second loans for down payments that allow homeowners to sort of maximize their mortgage that they're eligible to get. And the third thing that they do is they have a program that assists mobile home owners within parks to purchase their park. So they become owners of their park rather than just renters of land within their mobile home park. So that's a pretty good way for people to take ownership and keep their own costs down and manage their situation as well. As far as manufactured homes, if you're talking about, I guess that's a big nut to crack. If you're talking about homes that sit on foundations but are manufactured in let's say in a big warehouse and then come and brought to the spot versus a mobile home park, I think that's maybe a bigger question than we have time for this evening. But
I think
anything on a foundation is doable.
I think
Permanent
the tiny
foundation.
homes is kind of a hot thing that you're seeing a lot, and I know at least in Whitefish, there's really no codes for it right now. So that's something that they would need to work on if you try to do a tiny home development. There's just no building codes or anything for it.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that was also another question which I've just lost about tiny homes, and is that an option for solving the affordable housing problem?
Ryan and Ben can probably speak to this better, but what I've discovered with tiny homes is that you're typically putting them on very small pieces of land, and you're running a lot of water and sewer into very tiny pieces of land, and Montana's rules just aren't set up for it because it's a new idea. But
Yeah, my understanding at least with Kalispell, and I'll admit I'm not super clear on this, but I believe if we have in the code of plan unit development, where you basically come in and propose anything, and the staff will work with you, and then it goes before the council. And so I think if you have an idea with a plot of land, you can come in, with tiny homes. But yes, the existing code, if you want to come in and just put it without, a plan unit development, the existing code, because it is kind of a new approach and not your standard development, makes it a little bit more difficult. So, I certainly see the tiny homes factor playing in more when it comes to housing for our homeless, and finding a way to get them out of the elements, but a place of their own, and locations in our urban centers where we can accommodate that. I do want to come back though, just with the mobile home parks real quick, and say that a lot of folks feel that mobile home parks, they're an eyesore and so forth, and certainly understand that, but be mindful of the fact that at least outside of major urban areas and rural areas, the mobile home parks are probably one of the biggest sources of very low-income housing in our communities. They really pull their weight for the very affordable housing in our communities. And so if you see a mobile home park that gets somebody comes in with development plans, that is a concern, because you are losing housing at an affordable rate that is very hard to replace. So even though a lot of folks don't like the looks of them, that's very important housing in our communities for folks that are very hard to find equivalent affordability for.
Well, and I would guess when those turn into I think the ROC, residentially owned community, that there becomes a pride of ownership, and what may have been sort of a rundown mobile home park changes its appearance.
Yeah, I love the neighborhood.
yeah,
It's awesome.
you're seeing a lot of positive consequences of people owning their own parks.
I don't believe there are any mobile home parks left in Whitefish in the city limits? Nope. Nope, they're all gone. So not a solution there. Does Habitat for Humanity offer a significant impact with regard to affordability housing here in the valley? Habitat for Humanity, yeah, Ryan?
Yeah, I've had a conversation with the director of the Habitat for Humanity. I'll say I love Habitat. I volunteered and worked with them when I was in college, and it's a great program. The problem with Habitat is the scale. They just operate at such a small scale. They're doing a few houses every year. So it's a great program. The challenge is finding how to scale it up. But one of the things that in the conversation with the director of Habitat for Humanity, how this came up for me on city council, we had a city-owned lot in a subdivision, and I can't remember the history of how the city came to own that lot, but we were going to put it on the market and get rid of it. And I thought, what a great, we can maybe sell it at a slight discount to Habitat for Humanity. They build one of their homes on there. That's why I was contacting the director, and he said, can't do it. In fact, can't do it on in most subdivisions that are new, because all these subdivisions have homeowner agreements that have requirements for the type of siding you have, the type of roof angle you have, all this stuff that makes it so expensive that you cannot build an affordable home on those lots. And so one of the things I looked at is, can we put limitations on homeowners agreements that say that you can't put in factors that significantly increase the cost of the housing, which I think is part of the point of the homeowners agreement. So I'm not a big fan of homeowners agreements. Unfortunately, there was ran into some legal concerns there, and that didn't move forward in terms of any kind of limitations on it. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of homeowners agreements, and certainly with Habitat Homes, apparently most of our newer subdivisions are just off limits to them.
I do know that in Helena, the Land Trust and the Habitat for Humanity have teamed up so that the Land Trust owns the houses, or owns the property underneath the Habitat homes, and those homes then are deed restricted to maintain that they are going to be affordable forever. Of course, the people who are building those homes probably need to know ahead of time what they're getting into, but that's another one of those tools in the toolbox that's kind of interesting to think about.
This question, I can't help wondering why property tax revenue can't absorb some of the cost of providing community housing built along the main corridor with free and trolley routes to lessen the traffic volume. We can't, none of us here could decide where our property taxes go or what they go for, but is that an option for taxation to be directed, maybe through the resort tax, possibly? I don't know, I throw that out there.
Oh, yeah. One, I'd say there's a lot of demand on our property tax revenue and where it goes, and try and stretch those dollars. But I think one of the big issues with housing is that it's so expensive, to build, and so to pull tax dollars in communities of our size to build out deed restricted. One of the things I want to do is deed restricted affordable housing is just it's too big of a pull. Where you need to, that's where, and any deed restricted affordable housing you see is a pooling of many, many pots of money to make it work. And so you have, and that's where city-owned property, where you can take away that land cost is such a huge thing. That's one pot, that's one pool that you can reduce those costs. And then there's tax credit, federal income tax credits. That are one of the major players in development of deed-restricted affordable housing. The nonprofits in the community all kind of pull their money in. You have community development block grant funding, which we don't have. Our communities aren't big enough to get some of the bigger dollars for that. But that's a big source, but funding of deed-restricted affordable housing, subsidized housing, is a Byzantine process. It's one of the most complex things I've ever looked at in looking at policy issues of how to fund these things. And part of it, is just the priorities of this nation, right? Where we just don't fund things for lower income needs the way we do other priorities in the country. And so anytime you're trying to find money for that benefits lower income folks, it's just extremely difficult. And deed-restricted subsidized affordable housing is one of those things. It's very difficult to pull together enough money to make a project happen.
You mentioned community block grants. I think I saw an article in the paper that there is a meeting tomorrow, is it? Or did it happen?
Yeah,
It's
I believe
tomorrow.
it's tomorrow night. Yeah, probably in the council chambers. We have it every year. It's a kind of community listening session to say, the money comes through City of Kalispell, and there's a committee that looks at that, but they take public comment on what are our priorities. This is community development block grant funding. It kind of can go to a number of different things. Affordable housing is one of them, and every year, folks speak up and say this is what we need, but it can also go towards, development improvements, sidewalks, and can go towards loans to small businesses. So there's a lot of different things that is kind of put into that pot. And so if you have a priority of where you want that money to go, certainly tomorrow night, I think it's, I can't remember the time.
Seems like I saw maybe 11 in the morning. Does
Yeah,
that
it could
sound
be.
right?
Yeah, because I think they do that partly because a lot of the nonprofits participate. So
Is that just for Kalispell? Community-
the money comes through the City of Kalispell.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll be there tomorrow talking about the needs of affordable housing for Kalispell, but if Whitefish and Columbia Falls want to invite me to come to their public hearing, I'll be there too.
Good, all right. You've heard it here. None of you are bankers, but does anybody have ideas about how renters can become shareholders or part owners of apartment buildings or cottage camps or condominiums?
I don't know if this exactly answers the question, but we are fortunate in Montana that we have a long history of co-ops. The Whitefish Credit Union, the Parkside Credit Union, the Flathead Electric Co-op, CHS, they're all co-ops. And in Montana, we have an organization. They're based out of Great Falls, but they're all over the state. Montana Cooperative Development Corporation, and there are all kinds of co-ops where communities can come together. They're the kinds you're familiar with, but then there are also housing co-ops, and there are also what they call investor co-ops. So Ed's actually talked with Tracy McIntyre, who is the head of the Montana Co-op Development Corporation, and businesses can come together and say, we're pooling our money and we're all going to have shares and we're going to have a co-op, and community members can also buy into that co-op as well. So that there is one way for communities to do that.
Ed, do you have anything to add to that in terms, I guess specifically, of your relationship with co-ops?
Yeah, Tracy's been a real big help. Our plan is to form a co-op at some point. It takes time. It really does. So our group is forming an LLC now just to buy the land and get started. So, and I can update anybody at any time about, but it's going to take a few months before we have our co-op formed. So we're going to go with LLC for now. But I don't see a reason that, we couldn't open this up to tenants to become owners, it's an option that I'm sure we'll look at.
Seems like if you have an owner of, quote, an apartment complex, no different than the owner of a mobile home park that wants to sell, tenants could come together and figure out an offer.
Yeah, and if you create a co-op, I mean, it's just like owning a share in CHS. You can own a share in a housing co-op or an investors co-op in Whitefish if you want to. You don't have to live there necessarily, and it depends on how the co-op is designed.
What corridors or areas would be best suited for vertical, high-density housing? Is that something that gets studied or looked at in traffic or long-range planning here?
Can you read the question again?
So what corridors or areas, corridors I guess being highways, streets, whatever, would be best suited for vertical, high-density housing?
There's a limit as to how high you can build as it is. I think it's 36 feet, and then if it's
35.
affordable, 40.
35, 40 feet, you can get a,
In Kalispell, you can go higher, but you're limited by how high the fire trucks can shoot? No? Okay, that's what the city planner told me a few years ago. Okay.
So one of the things, off of Whitefish is we allow up to 60 feet, so essentially this gets up to about 5 stories. And we had a developer recently who was developing in town, and he said, and he had previously been developing in Whitefish, and he said, well, I'm coming down to Kalispell. One of the reasons I can go 5 instead of 3 and get density. And when I can get that density, I can offer it my units at a more affordable rate because I'm getting more density. So certainly, that's, if you want to talk about density, going 3 to 5 would be a good thing to look at in Whitefish. But we have the core area plan in Whitefish, in Kalispell, on our new Parkline Trail. Something we're very proud about in Kalispell, and the intention, the vision for the Parkline Trail is for high density development along there. And we hope to see, we hope the developers see that vision, and we see higher development in our downtown, our core area. But personally, that zoning reform that I talked about earlier, I would like to see that missing middle in the single family areas to allow for the duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes in our single family neighborhoods. But also, and we're seeing this significantly with the planned unit developments, the large new developments we're seeing in town, where we're seeing not only the single family units, but on most of the applications we're coming in, we're seeing multifamily apartment complexes together with the townhomes. And I believe that, any of our arterial routes, whether it's 3 mile, 4 mile, Stillwater, Airport Road, any of those should be open and available for higher density, multi-story unit developments. And there, we have recently considered the transportation plan, and I have strong opinions about what happens along 93 and Highway 2 and how we develop that as well. But the vision I have is for a lot more higher density multi-story units in lots of places.
The view from the top of the grain elevators in Kalispell is pretty spectacular. Somebody should build some tall buildings along that trail.
But no more than 5 stories. Unless,
Kalispell is 5 stories.
It's about 60 feet, but it amounts to about 5 stories. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
yes.
right.
I was going to say the grain elevators are 8 stories, so.
Yes, that's right. We did do a CUP for them.
sounds like you've been up to the top of the grain elevators, Ken.
Haven't been all the way to the top, but.
This question, I appreciate the good intention of 3% appreciation, deed restrictions, but what do you expect to happen if inflation and/or interest rates exceed 3% for a sustained period? I think you kind of touched on that a little bit, Jerry, but you've got some creative solutions. Do you want to share those, or are those proprietary?
Well, no, I think they're asking for a buyer, the 3%. Is that,
Oh, okay.
is that,
Well? Buyer, okay.
yeah. Well, again,
So-
it's kind of just set up for keeping it affordable forever. So it's not really meant for anyone to make money, although you can at 3% for sure.
Contrasting Kim's organization's mechanism of controlling price increases versus what the Whitefish Housing Authority and you are doing that imposes a nominal ceiling on price appreciation. It's just, I just, like, so for example, if you imagine a situation where interest rates exceed 3% for a sustained period, no one who lives in the houses will ever be making any money. They will lose their down payments, and no one will ever buy the properties. And so they will become abandoned. That's an extreme situation. But if we went back to 6, 7, 8% interest rates for a number of years, that's it. These properties are wiped out from those deed restrictions.
Actually, these properties will be more important then.
They'll be more important, but no one will be willing to buy. No one will buy them because they can't ever get their money back.
But not everybody buys a house for that purpose. But you're right. I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but not everybody buys a house for the purpose of.
No one will lend them money if it's inevitable that it's going to be lost. So no one will be able to buy houses.
That might be an interesting.
And I think that to me is a really important problem. Like, I absolutely admire what you're trying to do, but I'm concerned that this fixed 3% rate, rather than making it for example, a 1% real return, like, so it's inflation plus 1% is the restriction on the deed, then okay, that's a viable long-term solution. But a 3% fixed rate, just go back 20 years, to ancient history from the real estate market, and no one is going to touch those properties. And I think part of working through the Whitefish Housing Authority solutions and what your admirable efforts is to try to resolve that problem.
Can we take this question between those two one-on-one and get to the next one?
Yeah, I think it's a little confusing too, where you're not paying your mortgage on the total amount.
Exactly,
You're just
that's
looking
what I
at the
was.
total amount of appreciation.
Yeah, but
But it's hard, what the idea here is, the purpose is that through ownership of housing, you want people to build wealth. And what he's saying is it's impossible to build wealth under some conditions. So I think that his idea of tying it to an interest rate,
Yeah, it kind of comes down to also building wealth. If you're renting for 4 years, you're walking away from $100,000 to rent if you're paying $2,000 a month. Or if you're paying a mortgage and you sell it, even if you sell it at 0%, you're getting that money back.
well, that's an opportunity cost.
No one's going to buy it. Suppose I am someone who's in the various jobs we've discussed, I've never owned a home, I've saved like hell to come up with maybe a 10% down payment, maybe my credit's not perfect. Right now, my cost of borrowing is over 3%. If I have let's say I have a 700 credit score, I cannot borrow at 3%. Therefore, I cannot cover my cost. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, but you're not right if you won't buy. I have a list of 25 people who want to buy a house right now, and they're guaranteed 25% of whatever the increase appraised value is, but they're not getting that.
Your program doesn't have that, the same restriction.
I'm just saying that there are people in certain circumstances, not this particular one, not this particular market that we're living in today, but in some circumstance, even my houses could just be sold at 100% of what they paid for it, with no increase at all over and above what they actually paid for it. Because if the appraised value went down, 25% of zero is zero. But nobody's not buying these houses because they're afraid of that.
Yeah, if you're in a market where your deed restricted 3% homes are not selling below market, like we're at 60% appraised value. If this market does crash and median sale prices are no longer 700,000, you're correct, no one's gonna buy a $300,000 house. But no one's selling these kind of homes in markets that aren't that far apart.
I mean, I like my system better too, but
But I didn't come up with this system either, we were kind of told that's what we were doing. But it's common and it works.
It's a legitimate question, and I think maybe there are other reasons people go into, this kind of program, is to have a quality, affordable, a safe dwelling that they can afford to live in, that developers put time and energy into building, rather than building wealth. If they could afford a house that wasn't deed restricted. I'm going to stop babbling up here. It is exactly 9 o'clock, and we want to respect your time. We didn't get through all the questions, but I would encourage you, for example, to reach out if your question did not get answered here tonight. Everybody has kindly offered their email address, every one of the panelists here. We also have our email address, although I put it incorrectly in the program. It was a last-minute addition. flatheaddemocrat@gmail. So if you want to chime in that way with future program suggestions, panel discussions, maybe you want to see something like this again, but in Kalispell or in Columbia Falls, or something different. But we'd also appreciate your feedback on what went well, what didn't go well. Maybe we need a different moderator. There were some questions about the panelists filling in some different missing spots for commentary and discussion. But bottom line, I really appreciate your attendance and your willingness to listen to these experts here and to take in the information that is very valuable. Did we come away with solutions tonight? We'll see. But we can continue the discussion, and I think a lot of good information came out. I really appreciate you, and I want to give you a round of applause for being here.
thank you to all of you for being involved in your communities and caring enough to spend your evening here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Drive safe, everyone. Keep warm.